Okay, I think it's
Are
going.
the numbers counting?
Oh, yeah, they
Okay,
are.
so
It's gonna be like a
That's
very
great.
close-up of my
I can
face.
take it out. I can
Okay.
take it out. I did that with the first one where you could hear us all talking.
Mm-hmm.
I cut that part out. Of the
Okay.
video.
Yeah, there was a long little stretch of us chatting, probably. Okay, so we're just gonna do the first chapter today. And I kind of just broke it down into like the anatomy and then added in stuff about embryologically where it's from because he had a lot more stuff on the anatomical origins than he did on embryologic origins. Does that make sense? Okay, so there's 4 segments of the gut. Do you remember what those are?
Foregut?
That's one of
That's
them.
right. Yeah, foregut, head
Oh,
gut,
head gut, foregut, mid
mid
gut,
gut,
There you go.
hind gut.
gut.
And you can kind of see that. You can kind of see it. Perfect. So, what is the head gut?
It's the oral cavity,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to say pharynx.
It is. Cavity to pharynx. Yeah, that's probably readable. Okay. Okay. Then you have the foregut, and what's in the foregut?
Esophagus
Mhm.
and stomach.
And then the midgut?
Midgut, small intestine.
Mm-hmm. Just small intestine.
Yeah.
So what are the 3 sections of small intestine?
Don't just ingest duodenum, jejunum, and ileum.
What was that?
Don't just ingest. That's how I remember it.
Okay. Alright, and then the hindgut has what? There's 4 specific structures that make up the hindgut.
So large intestine, which is the colon,
Mm-hmm.
the it's the colon and the oh goodness, it's on the tip of my tongue.
The cecum.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 2 other things that might you kind of think of as one.
Yeah, so it's gonna be the anal tube.
He has like rectum and anus
Okay.
as separate things.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say that like the rectal tube kind of encompasses all of those things. So this is how, like, just a simple breakdown of anatomically where everything is. And then he just kind of talks about like the different, different segments of each. So for your esophagus, I'm gonna switch colors. What are 2 different types of esophagus you can have?
So you can have a smooth or a striated.
Yes. And then your stomach, what are the 2 different types of stomachs?
Simple and complex.
Mm-hmm. And who has a simple stomach and who has a complex stomach?
So ruminants have a complex.
Uh-huh.
Dogs, cats, pigs, humans, horses have a simple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So carnivores have a simple.
Uh-huh. So carnivores and omnivores, people are omnivores. Basically, you only have a complex stomach if you are a foregut fermenter.
Okay.
So you have ruminants and pseudo-ruminants. So a pseudo-ruminant is like llamas and alpacas because they only have a 3-chambered stomach.
Okay, that's your pseudo ruminant.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then I think it also says that like logomorphs are have a complex stomach. That could be wrong. Let me check. I feel like there's another one. Oh, marsupials. Marsupials have a complex stomach. I don't know how to remember that, but it's just a little they're just weird. Like if you ask what a marsupial is, just pick the weirdest thing. It's probably right.
And kangaroo.
Mm-hmm. And like opossums.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And then he also talks about the proximal versus the distal stomach, which we've covered a lot more in detail, but it might just help to talk about the parts of the stomach. So you have proximal and distal. So anatomically, what parts of the stomach are proximal stomach?
Proximal is going to be your cardiac, well, do you want me to start at the sphincters?
Can,
Okay, so
whatever helps you.
lower esophageal sphincter, then cardiac, and proximal fundus.
So it's gonna be all the fundus and proximal corpus.
Okay.
Do you want me to draw that?
Maybe there's a proximal in there somewhere.
Would-
No, I mean, I don't need it drawn, I don't think, unless you do.
Like the regions?
No, I
Okay.
mean, yeah.
Okay. And what's the function of the proximal stomach?
Storage?
Storage. Alright, so what makes up the distal stomach?
So you're gonna have the distal, 2/3 of the corpus,
Mm-hmm.
and then your pyloric region.
And then what's the sphincter?
Pyloric. I promise I'm not done, Brandy.
No, I don't think you are.
I kinda think I am sometimes.
I definitely don't think you are. Okay.
This is a proximal, that says LES, right?
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
So it's a proximal 1/3 of the corpus, right? Or does he just say proximal corpus?
He just says proximal corpus.
Okay.
If it helps you to think about it as the proximal 1/3, I think that's fine, but I don't think he directly specifies that it is.
I'm good with it.
Okay. And that is all I put down about the foregut. So for the midgut,
What's the job of the distal? It's for mixing
oh,
and.
yes, I'm sorry. So mixing. So it has all of those contractions that are gonna come in, and they are what make your food get down to less than 5 millimeters.
I got that question right.
Good.
We didn't put 5 student meetings.
He was judging hard.
Yeah, he really was.
Okay.
Okay, is foregut good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now midgut, it's small intestine, and it ends at the ileocolic orifice. So I'm just gonna write that down so we're more specific. What is the ileocolic orifice?
So that is where the ileum and goes into the colon.
Mm-hmm, and that's also where your cecum is.
Mhm.
So there's 3 types of openings that can be there depending on species. Do you know what those are?
So you have an ileocolic,
Mm-hmm.
you have an ileocecal, and you have an ileocolic cecal.
Perfect.
Oh, that was a big secret.
Oh, it is.
Oh, okay.
Ileocecocolic. Alright, so what they do is kind of in the name. So ileocolic, it goes directly from ileum to colon and basically bypasses the cecum. What species would that be good for?
So you're bypassing the what?
The cecum.
The cecum, so it's gonna be your carnivores.
Yes. So dogs, cats, and ferrets. Alright, so ileocecal, ileum to cecum, that means that the cecum is being used a lot because it's not going directly to the colon. So who would that be?
Horses.
Mm-hmm. And one more. Who's just like horses in
Like
everything
horse.
they do? Perfect. Rabbits. And then ileocecocolic means that there's an opening to the cecum and there's an opening to the colon. So who would that be?
Brunettes.
Units. And we don't talk about pseudoliths
People, I
anymore.
think.
Yes, people are. And one more, who's the other omnivore? So for ileocecal-colic, you don't necessarily need a cecum. Like, we don't really use ours because we're omnivorous. Pigs don't really use theirs because they can be omnivorous. But there's still the opening there, like, just in case.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And I think in people, your cecum is like what is it that always gets inflamed and you have to get cut out as a kid?
Appendix?
Yeah, it's like your appendix. Like, you have to have your appendix removed. It's because stuff gets into your cecum and then it causes an infection and you get sick and they're like, oh, we gotta go remove this because it's just a vestigial thing.
Huh. I did not know they did that before.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, there's some more stuff. Oh, okay.
Makes a lot more sense to me now.
Is this helping?
Yes.
Okay. And then your hindgut. Your most important thing here is your colon because there's several different types. Do you remember what some of those types might be? There's 3. It's like,
One of
Oh,
it's like
oh.
intermediate.
Yes.
that's one of
complex,
them.
and simple.
Yeah, so we have simple,
Yeah.
intermediate, and complex. Darn horses. Okay, so simple. This is who has a simple colon? Humans
Dogs.
and dogs. And
Cats.
yes, so like humans and carnivores have a simple colon. And what does that mean? What sections do you have?
Ascending, transverse, descending.
Mm-hmm. So it's just exactly like you think about it. There's all this small intestine here, and then all of a sudden there's ileum, and it goes ascending, transverse, descending. Does my little drawing make sense?
Yes.
Okay. It was kind of a little rough, so I want to make sure. Okay. Now intermediate. Who is intermediate?
Ruminant.
Ruminants. And one more.
Pseudo-ruminant? No, I don't know.
It's gonna be pigs.
Okay.
Because they do sometimes do some fermentation, I guess.
Okay.
So their colon is gonna be a little bit different than people's. So what is the layout of the intermediate colon?
Ascending.
But it has a special name.
Oh Lord.
So it might be easier to kind of draw it.
Is it, this isn't, I know the complex has a ventral and a dorsal, and there's 2 parts to each one.
That's true for complex. Intermediate's gonna be in a spiral.
Ah, that's right.
So,
Yeah, no,
it's-
spirals.
So here's like your ileal orifice, so
Uh-huh.
this would be small intestine. So it goes ascending spiral, then it goes descending spiral, and then it's, I think it's transverse and straight descending.
So your transverse is actually going like up instead of over
Yeah,
in a intermediate.
I mean, since we haven't seen it anatomically, I've had a really difficult time,
Imagine.
visualizing
Yeah.
it, but from all the diagrams I've seen, it looks like the transverse one is really going up to meet where the straight or descending colon is, because if you think like doing a palpation, your descending colon is like at this level
Yeah.
and like perpendicular to you standing.
Yeah.
So it's either going like this or it's coming up. I don't know because I've not seen it yet, but it's something like that.
Okay.
Do you want me to leave this little drawing?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Alright. So then the complex stomach. Or complex colon, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Who has it?
Horses.
Yes. And who else?
Rabbits.
Rabbits. But theirs is a little bit different. And I don't think he really like talked about it a whole lot. Theirs is a complex colon, but it's really only just has a large cecum. It doesn't have all the special things that the horse does. Okay? So it's easiest for me to just kind of start. I have a couple different like acronyms for remembering it. So he says, what was it? Like horses have a really voluminous colon, so RV is right ventral. So it starts right ventral, and then it's left ventral, because that's your only other option. And then since we're already on the left side, it goes to left dorsal. And then since we don't have any other options, it's going to go right dorsal.
So right, left, left, left.
And then since we have, like we're going right to left and left to right, we have the pelvic, or we have the flexures. So his acronym was like silly pony defecated, so SPD. So you have the sternal flexure, then in between you have the pelvic flexure, and then the diaphragmatic. And those just go in between the right to left, the left to left, and the left to right. So like I would almost guarantee you he's gonna say, starting at the beginning of the colon, give the order of like the large colon.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to say right ventral, sternal flexure, left ventral, pelvic flexure, left dorsal, diaphragmatic flexure, right dorsal. And you'll need to be able to do it in that order. But it's hard for me to be like right ventral, sternal flexure, left ventral, pelvic flexure. So I write this part first, and then I put my flexures in, but just make sure you get them in order.
Okay.
And even though he was like, oh, don't write anything in the margins or anywhere, you have an eraser, use it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
You okay?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yep, I'm good.
Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was silly when he said that. Everybody was like, and I was like, I'm just gonna erase
You
what I
write whatever you
Yeah,
need and erase it if it's that big a deal to him.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've talked about all of our different parts of the colon, and we can then discuss the arterial supply, which he just kind of mentioned, but it should be mostly review from anatomy. So when you're coming off the aorta, there's 3 big branches that supply the intestines and the stomach. Do you remember what they are?
Celiac, cranial, caudal, mesenteric.
And it makes sense. So your head gut is going to be ectoderm in origin, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. What you should know is the foregut, midgut, and hindgut are all endoderm in origin, and these 3 arteries supply the endoderm of the GI tract. So it's just in descending sequence. Like your foregut comes before your midgut, comes before your hindgut.
Your celiac.
And your celiac comes before your cranial, comes before your caudal mesenteric.
Dang.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where were you at when we were taking these quizzes?
I'm sorry, man. You got in for the last 2, even though this morning's one was awful. But
It was awful, and I was not prepared. I tried. It just didn't
it was
happen.
a little rough.
It's fun. though.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's not bad.
If only he was sorry.
It's not.
No.
Did you hear,
Lydia? Did you hear what he said to her?
Mm-mm.
He was pretty hateful.
I did hear that, and he was walking away, and she cursed at him, and I was like,
Oh, God.
I'm just gonna sit here and laugh for a second, because that was kind of funny.
I couldn't hear what she asked, but I could hear what he said, and I was like, oh my God, you don't
Yeah.
have to be that rude.
Yeah. I'm not gonna answer any more of your questions. I think that's a good question.
He said that to her?
Yeah, he said he thought his question was a good question. He wasn't going to answer any other questions she had.
That's exactly what he said. And after that, she was like, you blankety blank. I was like, woo!
Oh my.
Yeah, it was bad. Will you edit this part out?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so you have, just to recap, foregut is which artery?
Celiac.
Midgut is who?
Cranial mesenteric.
And what's hindgut?
Caudal mesenteric.
So then we can talk about the embryologic origin of this. So like I already said, foregut, midgut, and hindgut are endoderm. No, it helps if you spell. Except for, you should know that like the descending last third of the rectum or just to the cranial anal canal, including the IAS, that's endoderm, but the external anal sphincter is also going to be ectoderm. So EAS is ectoderm. And then up here, the head gut, oral cavity to pharynx, that's all going to be ectoderm. And then he also embryologically separates the head gut, foregut, midgut, and hindgut a little bit differently than like how we have done here. Like he separates it two different ways, which I don't like, but it is what it is. So for him, embryologically, the head gut is only the oral cavity. And that is ectoderm. Because the ectoderm is the oral cavity, or the oral cavity comes from the ectoderm, so the head gut is just going to be whatever was ectoderm in origin.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So then your foregut, he is going to change to where your pharynx is now included, and it's going to go to the duodenal papilla, so just a little ways into the duodenum, because that's how structures are developing embryologically.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Your midgut is going to go from that duodenal papilla to the proximal transverse colon. And I think that was the one that was like the proximal 2/3 transverse colon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so your hindgut will be the distal third to the internal anal sphincter.
Can I stop you real quick?
Yes.
Alright, so on the right side,
Mhm.
that's all physiologically.
Yes.
Okay. On the left side that you're doing now,
Mhm.
this is all embryologically.
Mhm.
Okay.
So this is probably definitely the older way of looking at things, because when you open the abdominal cavity up, you definitely see like a clear demarcation at the pharynx where things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
Then your esophagus to stomach, once you hit the small intestine, things really change from what they were in the stomach. So that's a really clear place to start the next thing. And then once you get to the colon, you're like, oh, this is way different from the small intestine. We're going to call it something else.
Okay.
But embryologically, we had different ideas, because what's happening is there's, like, in your gut, it's not growing from, like, if this is your mouth, it's not growing out like this until it gets to the end. It, like, starts here, it starts here, it starts here, and then it's growing in on the middle and in on itself. So there's multiple, like, jump-off points that it's starting at.
Okay.
Does that make
Yes.
sense? Okay. Because it would be easier if we could just look at it and say, well, it starts at the head gut and it develops embryologically until it gets to the hindgut. But in reality, it's starting at different times and it's starting in different places, and then it's growing until it meets the thing it meets up with.
Okay.
So that's why there's some discrepancy between the two.
So is the EAS technically considered hindgut in embryological origin just from the endoderm or ectoderm?
He is very unclear on this.
Okay.
In one of his charts, he had it with the head gut because it's ectodermal in origin.
Okay.
I think he tried to clear it up in lecture one day and he still was not super
Yeah.
clear, in my opinion. So I think,
It's not clear to you, we're all in trouble.
I don't think he would ask which one it's in embryologically. I do think him asking if it's ectoderm or endoderm is fair game.
Okay.
Like, there's so many other clear things he could ask, embryologic or anatomic origin. Why would he choose this one that's not explained very clearly?
Okay. Cool.
And that's also an odds thing, like, sure, he might, but there's all these other things he could pick
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah. We'll just hope he writes his test in sentences that coherently go together.
Yeah. And, oh, then we have the avian gut, which is different, just a little bit. It makes sense. Do you want to talk about it? He hasn't asked, I don't remember any questions about it, but it's just kind of cool.
Still, he has to come up with more questions on the test.
Do you want to picture this before I erase this?
I have it
Erase
written.
it. Look.
Yeah, I'm finishing up. You just leave it
Oh,
aside for a
okay.
second.
I won't touch it.
Well, you can erase all of this over here
Okay.
if you want, and then I'll have this finished by the time you get to it.
I'll just wait.
Okay.
It's cool.
Putting the pressure on me
Yep.
now.
Sure.
I can't. I didn't realize that there was a physiological and a difference, so it's throwing all my notes off.
Oh, I'm
Alright.
sorry.
No, you're fine. If Kale will give me a second and not rush me, I might be able to finish up.
Here, I'll get a drink of water so you don't feel so pressured.
Fantastic. That's great.
Okay. Eat my nuts.
There's like lines drawn out in the dirt.
I don't know why, but
I bet that's where pipes are. Do you think?
Yes, I do.
probably. So they don't cross them. If it's gonna stop, so
Mm-hmm.
never know.
Where'd you go? Why did they have to tear out below the level of the concrete?
Because they have to re-put in a new foundation, because that foundation was only for, a parking lot, which doesn't have like a million or more pounds on top of it, depending on what they build it out of, so they need a deeper foundation than what the
Okay.
concrete was.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. See, that's stuff I actually know. But that ain't gonna help me in real life. For this anyways.
Maybe one day you'll build a practice and have to know then.
Who's inheriting practice?
Yeah.
I'll never have to build one.
Ugh, you're one of those.
What do you mean?
He's a lucky one.
I'm not a lucky one.
Mm. You already have a client base.
Every job.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty good paying job, actually. I talked about it this weekend.
Can you cut out the
Yeah, I
the
could.
dead spaces?
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely can.
Why does that tell me that's not spelled right?
What is it?
Embryologically.
It is angry when I put in big words.
Okay, I'm done. I'm
Okay.
done.
Okay.
Sorry. How's your breathing doing?
A little bit better.
What makes it so bad? Do you know?
No, I've had problems my whole life. I had like allergy testing done, and then I was on like the injections for a couple years and didn't do anything. Every winter when I was a kid, I would get like bronchitis and pneumonia. That hasn't happened in a while. I just can't breathe all the
Yeah.
time now, so it's cool. Okay. So, birds.
And the bees.
Not today. This is the last semester.
What?
Like repro.
Oh. I thought you said ask my sister. And I
Whoa!
was like, whoa, what does that mean?
Taco.
Okay, my bad.
You're the one that says you're dating your wife's sister, so
I am dating my wife's sister.
I don't know what to tell you.
She's a beautiful girl too. One day when she comes around, which is like once every few months,
You need to just bring her and introduce her.
Yeah, I'd be like, hey, this is my wife, and this is my girlfriend. And all the guys would be like, dang, how does that work?
People still, when you say stuff like that, they're like, they won't look at you if I'm standing there, they just like look at me with confusion, and I'm like,
I know. It's awesome.
if you wanna know, you can ask.
Okay, so the first stop in the bird digestive tract is the crop. And what the crop is just the esophagus, but it's like a hole or just a little place where birds can store food in their esophagus before it gets to their stomach. That's literally all it is, just like an indentation. Food sits there for a little while. Then you have the proventriculus. Get these confused. Come back. Come back, computer. Which is going to be your glandular stomach. So all of like the acid and that kind of stuff, it's going to go onto the food they eat first. Okay. Proventriculus, glandular stomach. Then the ventriculus, which just means that's their gizzard. So it's going to be the muscular part of the stomach. This is what people eat. Yuck.
So weird if I eat that?
Do you eat gizzards?
Oh, I do.
They gross me out.
I eat liver too.
I won't eat livers. I know what livers do.
Yeah, that's why it's fantastic for you.
No. Yeah. Like, why do you think that chicken died? Well.
I mean, I can tell you, show you videos of these cool plants that,
Ugh. No. Okay, so your ventriculus is your gizzard, which is also the muscular part of the stomach. Then, birds have paired cecum, however you want to spell it. That would be like the one bird thing I would try to remember, because it's one of the like unique things just to birds. And then they have a colon and a cloaca. You guys all know what a cloaca is?
Yes.
Okay. You know what a cloaca is, Cody?
dude, for the eggs coming out. I almost got.
You have chickens. You should know all of this.
I almost got a dadgum video of an egg coming out the other day.
That'd be
I
cool.
could see that they were squatting, and I was like, it's about to come, and they were starting to dilate, so I ran in to grab my phone, and just as I came out, I was about to open the door back out, and I heard it hit. Dadgum, that'd been a cool video.
Well, the cloaca is eggs, urine, and feces.
Mhm.
Like everything.
Mhm.
All the things.
Yeah.
All the things. And that's all you need to know about birds.
Cool. Guys all written
So,
down?
that's
Do we
really.
need to know if they're like, since they have paired ceca, are we supposed to assume that they're like hindgut vermin?
I don't know.
Like, okay, I didn't know if he had said something about that, and we like.
He definitely did not mention what birds were, but that would be an interesting question to have answered.
Okay, I mean, if they have, I don't know, I would assume they would, if they have two of them.
And I mean, they're
Would be hindgut.
carnivorous for the most part.
Yeah, so I don't know.
I really don't know.
Okay.
Birds, I really know very little about birds, except they scare me, so.
So did you know in the I think
Ask my friend.
in
Okay.
1911 they had a bird that lived a whole year without a head.
Oh, I've heard of that, cause it still has brain stem, and they could, like, they were spoon feeding it. I watched a video about it, it was scary stuff.
Oh, cool.
I don't like birds.
Not all? Any bird?
I mean, they're okay. I worked with birds in undergrad, and one of them would, like, attack me every time I went into its cage. So, like,
You were a little gun shy, huh?
standoffish, yeah.
You were a little gun shy?
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't a small bird, it was a turkey vulture.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't like birds
And I
either.
was just told, they're like, oh yeah, just hit it with your little water scrubber that you have. And she'll stop doing it eventually. It's just like how she gets new people, like, broken in. She wants to see what you're worth, like, what she can get
What
away
the
with.
heck? That's crazy. I'd be
It's
like,
great.
no thanks.
So my little mentor went out to get eggs the other day, and he was scared of the chickens. And I was like, yeah, when I took him home, he was like, what'd you do? And I was like, oh, I got to see the chickens. And I said, he is terrified of chickens. And his parents go, yeah, it's cause the goose. Did he tell you about the goose? And he did, he was like, a goose got me. And when they told me about it, they're like, yeah, that goose got him. Not like a little got him, but like chased him, getting him.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
You wanna know something
I
funny?
was like, "What's on?"
You know,
I'm sorry.
stupid geese by Theta Pond.
Mm-hmm.
So my freshman year, I had a class, like I was going from over by the library to across the street from Theta Pond, and I walked by Theta Pond one day. And the dang thing, it was just like standing there, and I was minding my own business, walking by, and all of a sudden I like hear, it's like, and I like look back, and it starts to like waddle a little faster. And so I started walking a little faster, and it started like running at me, and I was like, oh my god!
That is the
It
stuff of
literally
nightmares.
chased me till I got to stairs, and then he stopped and just like turned around, and like everybody was laughing at me, and nobody was trying to help me, and I was like, I have not walked by that pond since that day.
Birds are just small feathered dinosaurs.
Yeah, it like chased me, and I was like, not today. This is not happening.
Alligators are cool though.
I like alligators, but I also don't want to be in a pond with one, so.
I think that'd be fun. Pet alligator? Come on. If you could teach an alligator how to sick 'em, police dogs ain't got nothing on me.
I don't think that's how it worked, but you keep on dreaming.
I'm just saying, they taught bees how to put,
It's your $1 million idea right there.
I'm
Just
telling
do
you,
it.
golly.
Well, I mean, moats, like everybody had moats back in the day. They had filled with gators.
Yeah, they just fed them though. That's why they stayed.
No, they were in a moat. They couldn't go anywhere.
I think it's just
They can get out.
No, that's the purpose of a moat.
Yeah.
Oh, I would let mine out. They did not want to come anywhere near.
Because that's like the bears, like some places in Europe, like they still have, it's like old moats, but they put bears in them to protect
Mhm.
the, yeah.
I'm gonna stop this because we're like done.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, we are?
Yeah.